What's going on, everybody? Teach back again with another video, and today we're talking about this 2023 quarterback group. It's an exciting group, but there's a lot still to be figured out about this patch. If you're new to this series, welcome to it. I'll run through my rankings 5 up to 1, and then I'll give you some honorable mentions. Today you're seeing corners. Tomorrow you'll see safeties. Next week you'll see an updated NFL mock draft. May stretch it out to 2 rounds, but that promise still probably only going to be a first rounder. But nonetheless, we're getting closer and closer to next April. Let's waste no time and start talking about this corner group. So starting with my CB number 5, Eli Reiss. So former LSU Tiger, transfers over to Alabama. You've heard that storyline 1,000 times, but that really does signal the amount of talent that is, at his disposal. Also 6'2", 190 pounds. That's a great size profile, and I am someone who is biased for those long, lanky corners, so he definitely kind of fits what I'd like to see a corner look and play like. But the troublesome, beginnings, if you will, to his tenure at Alabama kind of carried over from some of the stuff that you heard at LSU. And realistically, what I'm trying to get at is here, his snaps have gone down week over week that he's played, and he didn't even play week 3. And part of that, at least leading up to this season, was, it's taken him a while to learn the playbook. There was some of that that I heard at LSU. Now, granted, I'm not directly connected, and I don't have anybody who's, I trust that's specifically talking about this issue. So don't know it for certain, but if those reports are true, then that's a little bit of a concern. But that being said, if he gets drafted to a team, you like to think that he would put in the work, or, you talk about a rookie contract at least 4 years, with that time, ideally he'd be able to learn the playbook. So a little bit of a concern there when it comes to, the off-field side of it, but it's not necessarily personality related, so it's not as big as maybe as it could be. Nonetheless, size, and maybe not the world's best athlete, but really explosive in his back pedal, and because of that, he hasn't done a whole lot of it, specifically at LSU and waiting to see here at Alabama, but doesn't do a whole lot in press coverage. But the snaps that we have seen, he's got great production off of it, so that could totally be a skill set. Again, at 6'2", 190, that becomes part of his, NFL MO. So, and with that, explosive back pedal, he doesn't get beat very often. So, sticky man press cover corner, I think at the next level for sure. Unfortunately, we got to see that a whole lot at the college ranks. So on to number 4, let's talk about Joey Porter Jr., obviously the son of a former NFL player. Those are some great genes to be pulling from, but another one of these long, lanky corners, 6'2", 198, so even a little bit bigger than Reiss, but totally fits that type of corner that I'm a little bit biased towards. Just gotten better year over year at Penn State. And I mean, doing it in the Big Ten, doing it in a Power 5 conference, that's really encouraging. So the only number that's really taken a dip back this year is his tackling, but as a boundary corner, not as concerned about that. We'll talk about some names in the honorable mentions that I think more than likely end up making a move to slot only at the NFL level. Those guys' tackling ability I care about a lot more than I care about those guys in the boundary, but it is certainly a nice cherry on top of sorts. But going to be interesting the rest of the year. Again, playing at a premier conference. Haven't seen Ohio State yet. There's going to be some other matchups and some games that he could either bolster his stock big time with some of the tape that he puts, onto film, or it could pretty quickly be like, there's something there, but he's not refined. He needs to be, a day 2 type of guy. So he'll make or break his stock here as we get further and further along in the college season. We are still early in this process, but traits are there. You've seen the progression. Of course, the son of Joey Porter certainly does him, no disservice. A little bit handsy, but I think that's just kind of a, college corner thing you have to break through once they get to the NFL. And, some of the, depends on, whose opinion you take, but been described as a guy who's better in press coverage versus off coverage. I would tend to agree, but haven't dove into the newest batch of film and what we've gotten so far in 2022 to just see how that much has changed. But nonetheless, if that is something that carries over the NFL level, 6'2", 198, I kind of like to see him at the line anyways, and being a jam press coverage corner. So again, kind of biased towards the corner types here to start at 4 and 5. Then we move on to Cam Smith, 6 foot 188, so a little bit of a different body profile, but he does still have those long arms. He will have some athletic limitations. DraftBuzz.com, I think they have his projected 40 at like a 4.55, and yeah, 4.5 probably about right compared to, we get really excited about 4.3s, 4.4 types. But again, super long arms, has really good ball skills, and he really is natural when it comes to initiating contact at the line of scrimmage. It's not quite J.C. Horn, and that dude basically takes a receiver out of a play with how good he can be at the line and his press technique. Not quite there, but nonetheless, dude's really comfortable initiating contact, which, again, with athletic limitations, let's slow down this receiver at the line as much as we can. I think that kind of negates some of his weaknesses there. J.C. Horn was a little handsy at South Carolina, and again, these players are not necessarily the same, but South Carolina helmet scouting kind of comes into play here. Smith doesn't really have those same struggles, or at least penalties have not been a major issue so far in his career. Knock on wood if you're a Gamecock fan. But all that to say, put that aside. That's kind of the one big, I'd say, feather in the cap that Smith has over a J.C. Horn type. So I don't think he'll be, a guy who goes in the top 10 like a Horn, but just because of those athletic limitations. But nonetheless, if this is a guy your favorite team drafts on, mid to late day one, I'd feel pretty comfortable with it because, especially in a man-heavy scheme, I think he'll be fine there. And if he ends up getting a zone-heavy defense, I think those athletic limitations maybe are negated a little bit just because he has an assignment, he has a lane, he has, a cover 3, valley, if you want to call it that, so or cover 4, quadrant, a lane again. So I think this guy's going to be a really solid, NFL caliber, player that, I could see in 5 to 10 years where we're talking about him and it's like, God, that guy put together a great career despite not being one of the game's best athletes. So kind of excited to see what the rest of, the season has for Cam Smith. Of course, this could look really crazy here in a few weeks because the SEC is, volatile, especially against corners. Like he might have a couple of bad games in a row and next thing it's like, all right, Cam Smith's probably, a round 2 guy. So we'll have to wait and see, kind of think about, Roger McCreary, kind of starts out this guy's, he's going to be a first rounder, has some, overall good season, but a little bit of a couple bumps late. Then, the arm length comes out. Next thing you know, he's a second rounder. So Kyrie Elam, I think, is another good example. Guy who I had in the top 10, loved, the traits and what he could be. Couple bad games, including Samford, which, that's a bad spot to have a tough game. But then ultimately becomes a late first rounder. And if not running for a 4.4 at Indy, probably is going to be a day 2 guy. So I digress. Long tangent aside. Let's move on to my top 2 here. And, I think this is an open competition. Garrett Williams, we'll start with him at Syracuse. Been really solid for the Orange 3 years in a row with his Pro Football Focus grades. Could be a guy who decides to go back and maybe become CB1 in 2024. Maybe, but I could also see the door being ajar enough this year where he's like, yeah, I'm going to go make some NFL bread. Decent size, 6 foot, 189. That's certainly not bad. It's not quite 6'2", 198 with Joey Porter, which I love, but NFL caliber size, it's not going to be a liability once it gets to the next level. Willing tackler, smooth mover in space too, which again, I kind of think about what I was describing Ifeatu Melifonwu as a corner coming out of Syracuse. Really liked him as a zone. Your team runs a lot of cover 4, a lot of cover 3. That 2-4-6 specifically, I think, was a nice fit for Ifeatu Melifonwu, but I think, cover 3, if your defense sits in that a lot, he'd be fine there too. I think some of that kind of carries over into Garrett Williams and what you look at what he could be in a zone-heavy defense, but I think there's some more man coverage ability in his game. Doesn't get to play a whole lot of it at Syracuse, but again, with that size and athletic ability, I think it could be something he adds to his game. I feel a little bit more comfortable with it with Garrett Williams than I do with Ifeatu Melifonwu, but that is probably just me and where we are right now. Again, still early in this process. Let's see how the rest of 2022 plays out. But nonetheless, again, also only a redshirt sophomore. So some of these traits, we just don't know because he hasn't been asked to do it. And because he's so young, we just haven't seen the opportunity come to arise. So could be a guy who also maybe once you get into an interview, which I'm not in a position to do, could be a guy where it's like, hey, do you have a preference man zone? And then it comes out, he says, I wish I could play more man. So some of that is also college limitations. I don't know what Syracuse is necessarily trying to do with Garrett Williams and how they're trying to maximize his value. But nonetheless, size, 3 years of really good grading, 2 of the ACC. Really solid athlete. I'm excited to get those exact numbers once we get to Indianapolis, but nonetheless, really excited about Garrett Williams' prospects. And then Keely Ringo comes in at number 1. His Pro Football Focus grades have taken a little bit of a step back, but I don't want to overreact to that because last year, awesome. And that Georgia defense, it's still one of the best at the college level, but considering how much talent they lost in the NFL draft last year, it was expected maybe that it would take a little marginal step back, and maybe that's part of why Ringo's numbers aren't as great in their grading system at Pro Football Focus, but nonetheless, NFL body at 6'2", 210, has the athleticism, can play in man zone, can go get you at the line, can play off. I see him as a guy who can do everything. So yes, the play hasn't been as good, the production hasn't been as awesome as it was a season ago, but the talent, the traits, everything you want in a number 1 corner is there, and a guy who could potentially go in the top 10, top 12, top 15 range as a corner, be the first corner off the board. I think he's got all that. And again, still early in the regular season. He's got some other matchups that we're just going to have to wait and see. How does he fare against some of the other wide receivers he has on the rest of his schedule? So this could be a guy who his stock continues to rise, or maybe it hits a little bit of a bump in the road. His play is still kind of meh compared to last year, and that opens up the door for Garrett Williams. So that's part of what I'm excited to see with the rest of college football season. How does this cornerback room shake out and these rankings shake out? But right now I got Ringo 1. He was kind of the preseason consensus number 1. And for right now, I think I still got him in that spot. But with my top 5 out of the way, let's go ahead and start talking about some of these honorable mentions. Let's start with Chris Abrams-Drain. This is probably one of those guys I think best suited to move to the slot. Wide receiver turned corner. He's 5'11", 178. The 178 in specific is like, maybe he ends up playing, nickel owner. That being said, has lived on the outside this year at Missouri, so that's awesome to see. Despite his size, though, really solid, tackling percentage, tackling grade and low missed tackle percentage using PFF's numbers again. So that's an encouraging sign. And again, with the background as a wide receiver, you kind of see his instincts kick in zone coverage. He feels like he knows that space well enough to where, again, if your team runs and this is a guy where if he gets into a cover 3 heavy defense, I'd love to see him in that nickel spot, just roaming the flat, just reading quarterback's eyes, making plays. Or if your team runs a lot of cover 2, I think then you could have him as a boundary guy. And again, he's patrolling the flat. I think that'd be a really interesting spot to see him in. We kind of saw that revitalize the career of Xavier Rhodes with Matt Eberflus in Indianapolis. And I think that would be a nice role for Chris Abrams-Drain. But yeah, could be an interesting player once we get some athletic measurables. Maybe he runs a fast enough 40 to where the size doesn't, really weigh in a factor. And also at 5'11", 178, of course, arm length is going to be something that is going to be talked about. So hopefully he hits that quota and, he can be a guy who goes in the first round. Move on to Clark Phillips again. Another one of these, probably slot types, 5'10", 183. A little bit, little bit more weight to it, but also has a little bit of a slighter build. So again, we'll have to wait and see what NFL teams, talk about Clark Phillips as a boundary or a nickel-only guy. But when you see his willingness to tackle, that's part of what makes me so comfortable with him potentially being a guy who plays the nickel. Dude plays with a chip on his shoulder, and he plays mean. But you look at his Pro Football Focus grades, have gone from 66.7, 74.6, to 76.5. Again, that year-over-year progression, that type of slope is something that NFL teams are going to jump all over. And add on 4 career picks to just 3 touchdowns given up. Yes, it's at Utah. I understand. It's not a premier conference or anything like that, but the production's been there. So, again, athletic traits and measurables are going to weigh heavily on his draft stock since he is coming from a small school. But as a nickel only, I think he could totally be a high caliber player at the NFL level, and I think there's still some potential to maybe see what he looks like as an outside corner. Again, that'll come down to arm length and if he hits teams' quotas. Okay, next 3 guys, they all kind of have a knock against him. So DJ Turner, you go into these preseason cornerback rankings, and he's really nowhere to be found, but 6 foot 180. Fine enough size, but he's one of the top graded, PFF, cornerbacks. So seeing that type of production is really encouraging. You look at a 78.3 overall grade, 83.3 coverage grade. This year, those numbers are at 81.8. 81.1 and 81.8. So was awesome last year. Continues to be a really solid player, one of the best graders in PFF system this season. So production speaks. NFL caliber size. You don't really worry about 6 foot 183 or 180. So maybe it isn't somebody who's being talked about right now, but maybe becomes the name that once we get closer and closer to April becomes one of those easy day 2 types of picks when you start doing second and third round mocks, and you're like, okay, yeah, well, DJ Turner, this team needs a corner. He kind of fits in there. And again, he is doing this in a Power 5 conference in the Big Ten. And then Stephen Gilmore from Marshall had an elite coverage grade against Notre Dame. Now, speaking as an Irish fan, so I can say this, but that team lacks some playmakers on the outside. Even when Notre Dame's had shaky quarterback play, they had, a Will Fuller, a Miles Boykin, a Chase Claypool type that kind of generated big plays and bailed out some quarterbacks that were, rough of years past. That's just not there right now for Notre Dame. So an elite coverage grade for Stephen Gilmore, but that said, I don't think he had the hardest assignment, but hey, an elite coverage grade against Notre Dame, that looks awesome on a resume. So that's just like a little layer of extra context there. That it shouldn't look as good as it does, but it does look good. And of course, he's the younger brother of Stephon Gilmore, so kind of going back to the Joey Porter thing, yeah, that's something that will naturally kind of add some gravitas and some levity to his draft stock. Solid enough size, right around 6 foot, only 170 on Marshall's side. It'd be interesting to see if he really is that thin. Is he that slim? That feels because he doesn't look like it, at least when I look at him. So again, waiting on official measurables and things from Indianapolis. He is a 5th-year player, so that also could kind of dampen his stock, and maybe he is only a day 2 guy at best because of that. I can kind of see him being this year's Asante Samuel Jr., even though Asante Samuel Jr. came out earlier in his career, but that guy where it's like, dude, him as a second round corner, yeah, I love that. And again, kind of the family lineage kind of plays a factor in their stock, yada, yada, yada. But that being said, 5th year, and he's having the best year of his career. Coverage grade at just under 81, overall grade right around an 80. So again, I'm kind of interested in that weight perspective, but he's having a breakout season, doing it in Marshall, win at Notre Dame. That could be the big game we all look back to, and that's why we think of Stephen Gilmore as a 2nd or 3rd round type of guy. And then Noah Daniels, real quick here. The talent's there. He could have been drafted multiple times in the last couple of years, but dude just cannot stay healthy. So really unfortunate that we, continue to talk about Noah Daniels because if you've been around this channel, he's a name you've heard me talk about before. And even before I had this channel on my radio show, he was the guy I was interested in. And that's just in general TCU cornerback duo with Trevius Hodges there as well. That's just a good duo. So again, we'll have to wait and see where their stock goes throughout the rest of the season. But that's going to do it for my 2023 cornerback initial rankings and honorable mentions. Tell me what you think down below in the comment section. Was there a name I left off that you think I'm crazy for not including? How would you rank this group 5 up to 1? And who are some names you think I left off of my honorable mentions? Love to have your thoughts. It's a conversation. It's only one-sided if it's me putting in my input. Love to have your thoughts down below. So let's talk about it in the comment section. Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to hit that like button. Help me out a ton. If you're new right here, want to see more football content, just hit that big red subscribe button. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, signing off.